Hey guys, I'd like to welcome everybody again to By 155 Nutrition. We're going to start the lecture series videos with, of course, chapter one. This is just a general introduction type of a chapter. As you go through the chapter and as you go through the notes, make sure you are studying the vocabulary. I'll be using, a lot of the questions for the exam based on some of the vocabulary that we talk about and kind of show here in the notes. And so make sure you kind of take a note of that. I'll also be referring to some of the tables and resources in the ebook, and so I'll try to kind of give you, if there's a diagram or a table, I'll try to give you that information as we go through the video. The first chapter is again just kind of introduction to nutrition and some things maybe you've seen before. We're going to kind of start out with some of the key vocab words, and like I said, some of these things you've no doubt seen before. One question I'll always like to ask students is, what do you think of when you think of the word diet? Most of the time, maybe not all the time, but many times that automatically thinks we think of losing weight, and that may be part of what we're talking about. But the kind of the overall definition is just what your normal pattern of food is on a daily basis, or on a weekly basis. What types of choices are you making? That's your diet. Now we will be talking about specific diets. Probably the one that you hear about the most could be like the keto diet, ketogenic diet. And so we'll kind of look at that throughout the course. We'll look at other diets maybe you've seen before, heard about before. The Atkins diet was kind of a somewhat of a fad type of diet prior to keto, I guess, and it's a low carb, high protein type diet. A couple that you see currently, Mediterranean diet, we'll look at that, kind of see what that's all about. The DASH diet is kind of a low sodium, heart healthy type of a diet. So there's lots of different dietary patterns. You'll have the opportunity in some of the assignments that we look at to kind of think about your own personal diet and your own personal food choices as we go through. The next kind of keyword here is a nutrient. And that's a big part of not just this chapter, but it's a big part of the course. By definition, a nutrient is any kind of life-sustaining chemicals that we have in our food or drinks. And so that's a big term, really, but chemicals that are helpful in sustaining life, helpful for our cells to grow, go through cell division. It gets us, what our muscles need, the energy levels that we need, fuel sources that we need. And so as we go through, some of you have had some anatomy and physiology. It's not a prereq for this course, but we're going to refer back to some things that go through a little bit of our physiology as we study nutrition, and even a little chemistry. And so I know you guys love some chemistry. We're going to look at a little chemistry, maybe not like a chemistry class would. But when you think about it, those life-sustaining chemicals, the foods that we eat, are basically chemicals. And so it's important to understand a little bit of basic chemistry as we go through, like I said, the unit. So these are nutrients, and you could probably name some nutrients already, things like proteins and carbohydrates and lipids, all of those, and we'll talk about in a little while, those are macronutrients. We need lots of those. The textbook has a chapter dedicated to each one of those. And so we're going to introduce a few things about them today and in this chapter, but we've got a whole chapter dealing with proteins, a whole chapter dealing with carbohydrates, a whole chapter dealing with lipids. There's a chapter dealing with water and minerals because those are nutrients as well. You got to have water. Even though that's not a source of fuel, it's not a source of energy, but it's still considered to be a nutrient. It's life-sustaining. We've got a chapter dealing with vitamins. And so we'll kind of, introduce nutrients today. And then, like I said, we'll cover these in more detail as we go through. But that also brings up another question is like, well, if all of these are nutrients, is there such a thing as a non-nutrient? Is something that, what's something that's in our food that's not considered a nutrient? And we're going to look at that a little bit today as well. There's chemicals, especially when you think of the plants that we eat. Plants produce chemicals, and they're in our diet. And if you're eating fruits and vegetables, but they're not life-sustaining chemicals. Not that they're bad for you, and many of them are beneficial for you. But they're not by definition a nutrient because they're not life sustaining. But let me just kind of, while we're here, I'll go ahead and throw one out at you. Caffeine. Have you had any caffeine today? Many of us have. You don't have to have that to survive. You don't have to have caffeine in your diet, but many of us have some. It has some effects on the body, has stimulatory effects. Some people respond differently to caffeine than others. But it's a non-nutrient. It's not considered a nutrient. It's produced naturally by some plants. We have it in our diet. Of course, we have, if you have caffeine in your coffee or tea or even in chocolate or wherever your source of caffeine is, that's a non-nutrient. And so I'll give you some other examples as we go through. There's your definition of chemistry. We're going to study a little chemistry as we go through. We'll look at things like pH, and we'll look at things like, well, what's a carbohydrate made out of, right? The simple sugars like glucose or fructose or lactose, those are all chemicals. We need to understand that chemistry is very important in nutrition. And so we'll look at chemistry as we go through the chapters as well, and a little bit of metabolism, because that's all these chemicals kind of working together, all these different chemical processes taking place in the body. That's all your metabolism. And so you're always going through processes like digestion. The foods that you eat, you have to digest them. And once you have it digested, you absorb it into the body, and then you use metabolism to kind of build up all of those building blocks of the body, all of those things. You digest some proteins, you get some amino acids. Well, now I need to take those amino acids, put them back together to build up muscle tissue, or to build up collagen in the body, in the skin, or in the organs, or keratin in the hair and the nails, different proteins that you have. Any kind of chemical process taking place in our cells is part of our metabolism, right? So basically, kind of take a look at those definitions, understand what they mean. One question that the textbook mentions is, why should we learn about nutrition? And their biggest reason here is it contributes to our overall health. And they remind us here that some of the leading causes of death, such as heart disease, cardiovascular disease, certain types of cancer, things like stroke, which is when the brain doesn't have the adequate oxygen supply. It's like a heart attack doesn't, when you have a heart attack, when an individual has a heart attack, they have a occluded vessel or a blocked vessel in the heart that prevents, oxygen from getting to the muscle. Well, if you prevent blood flow, or you block blood flow to the brain, that would be a brain attack or a stroke. Even diabetes, all these are leading causes of death. You can kind of see the figure there of some others. Many of these have to do with our overall nutrition, or at least could be, perhaps we can perhaps prevent or prolong certain types of diseases if we have the proper nutrition. And of course, exercise plays a big role. We do have a chapter dealing with exercise and physical activity a little bit towards the end of the semester. I already mentioned, I think, all of these nutrients in the body, the 6 categories that we're going to be talking about. Maybe you already know a little bit about each one of these: carbohydrates, lipids, which lipids are not always fats, but that includes mostly what we're thinking about when we think of lipids are fats. There's other examples we'll look at. Proteins, of course, vitamins, minerals, and water. And like I said, we'll have a chapter dealing with each one of these as we go through. Here's just kind of a little breakdown of each one of those. And table 1.1, that's in the ebook there, it kind of goes through this information as well. Carbohydrates, like I said, we've got a whole chapter dealing with each topic here. And so we'll really get into in-depth discussion about each one of these a little bit later. But what comes to mind when you think of carbohydrates? Probably energy. They do some other things, but that's kind of the main idea behind why we should eat, or why we have carbohydrates in our diet, because we need a fuel source. We'll talk about the structure of the carbohydrates. We'll talk about simple sugars like fructose, glucose, lactose, milk sugar. We'll talk about more complex carbohydrates like the starches that we have in our diet or fiber that we have in our diet, and the energy sources that we have there. Lipids, again, we think of fats mainly, and they provide also energy there, more of a long-term type of a storage system that our body uses for storing up extra energy units there. But some lipids do other things. And so some lipids, we find lipids in our cell membranes. Those are called phospholipids. We find some lipids that are steroid based or steroids in the body, or such as cholesterol or hormones in the body, especially things like your reproductive hormones. These are lipid based type hormones. Proteins do a lot of different things in the body. And like I said, we'll kind of look at that chapter, and we'll talk about amino acids. We'll talk about how they're kind of formulated, put together. But they do a lot of different things. A lot of the structural parts of the body, things like collagen that you find in your organs, in your skin, and your bones. Things like, of course, your muscles take proteins. There's like 6 or 7 different proteins that go into all of the muscle contractions that you go through. Cell development, immune system is a function of proteins, because your antibodies are proteins. Even getting a little bit of energy, your body can use proteins as a fuel source. We'll talk about water and why that's important to maintain fluid balance. We want to make sure that any water or fluids leaving the body get replaced, and we got to have the proper hydration. We want to make sure that we're well hydrated, but not overhydrated. And so we'll look at that. We'll see how water plays a role in regulating our body temperature. Has a connection with our blood supply, or blood volume, with our blood pressure. All these kind of go together in that discussion. And then vitamins and minerals, of course, they do a lot of different things, a lot of body processes, cell processes going on that require some type of reaction with enzymes. Many times those enzymes require some kind of vitamin, but we'll look at those, like I said, in more detail a little later. Now, early on, I want you to really get a grasp of these two terms up here: essential versus non-essential nutrients. There again, when we think of the word essential, we automatically think that it's required, it's needed by the body, and it is. But sometimes when we see the word, so if that's true, and we see the word non-essential, we automatically think, well, then it's not needed. You put the non in front of there, we think it's not needed by the body, but that's not true. Let's look at the actual definition here for essential nutrient. Essential means it's essential for us to eat. It must be supplied by our diet. In other words, the body doesn't make it on its own. Our bodies can make, if everything's working correctly, can make certain nutrients. And so, for example, you can make some amino acids. You can make a little bit of vitamins. You're probably aware of getting vitamin D production. If you've got the right amount of sunlight, you can make a little bit of vitamin D on your own. You're making cholesterol that's taking place in the liver. So you can make some nutrients. And so these are referred to, and you can make some amino acids. These are referred to as non-essential. It doesn't mean that you don't need them. I still need these vitamins, these amino acids, cholesterol. I still need it, but I don't have to ingest it unless I'm not getting the proper diet and nutrition. So again, kind of make that clarification. Essential means you have to have it in your diet. Your body doesn't produce it. There again, if it's missing from your diet, you could have a vitamin deficiency or a nutrient deficiency of some type if you don't have enough. And table 1.2, let me flip over there. Table 1.2 kind of gives you a breakdown of, some of the main vitamins. You don't have to memorize all the ones, but some of the main vitamins that are considered to be essential, things like vitamin A, B. Most vitamins are essential. In other words, you don't make a lot of vitamins. Again, you make a little bit of vitamin D as long as you've got the sunlight. You can harvest a little bit of vitamin K because you have a system in place, or at least bacteria in place in your gut that produces a little bit of vitamin K, but you're really not manufacturing it on your own. So, most vitamins are considered to be essential. You got to have them in your diet. So where that word nutrient is, just imagine you can substitute in, another nutrient. So in other words, essential nutrient could be an essential amino acid or an essential vitamin or an essential substance, a carbohydrate or whatever. We'll see that word throughout many times throughout the chapter. So like I said, kind of get a good grasp here. Remember I said that not everything is a nutrient. You can have non-nutrients. And a lot of times these are phytochemicals. That prefix phyto refers to plants. And so these are plants that are producing certain chemicals. They have some benefits for us. They have health benefits. They're just not considered nutrients because they're not required for sustaining living cells and living cell processes. When you take a look at these words, they look a little scary almost to think that we're eating these chemicals in our diet, carotenoids, phenolics, organosulfide. But these are harmless. These are actually beneficial type of chemicals that plants produce. If you look in the word carotenoid, you may see the word carotene, and so that is a pigment that plants can use, and we can use it to actually make a little bit of vitamin A. And so that's actually a very helpful pigment that you find in especially the orangey colored vegetables, things like squash or pumpkins and sweet potatoes. They have the carotene type pigment in there. Phenolics, there's a list, and I'm kind of referring back to table 1.3. You don't have to memorize all the different types. There's very chemical terms there for each group, but these are found in lots of fruits and vegetables. But one of the main benefits behind the phenolics is that they have antioxidant properties. If you've not seen this word, we'll talk about this a little bit later in the course, but here it is. Antioxidants are chemicals that help to protect cells from certain types of damage. A lot of times you hear about UV light damage. UV light can actually damage your DNA damage your cells at the DNA level. Well, antioxidants can actually help to kind of repair some of that. And so fruits, vegetables, especially fruits like berries, strawberries, raspberries, blueberries, cranberries, these have a pretty high concentration of antioxidants that can help protect cells from damage and may help prevent certain types or inhibit certain types of cancers. Vitamin C, it has some different functions, but one of the functions that they believe it has is to function as an antioxidant. Same thing about the organosulfide group there. Again, it sounds kind of scary, but things like garlic and onions and broccoli and cauliflower and cabbage, all these, especially the green leafy type vegetables, they have these chemicals in there. It's a sulfur-based chemical. Sometimes that means it's very aromatic, but they have antioxidant properties, and so they're very helpful. I didn't list it on the note here, but caffeine would fall into another category of a phytochemical called an alkaloid, and caffeine is has a stimulatory effect on the body. But all of these are considered non-nutrients. All right, section 2. Section 2, risk factors for chronic diseases. Think about some of these, especially if you know of someone that has a chronic type of a disease, a long-lasting disease. Maybe they've have something like diabetes, or maybe they have a cardiovascular problem. Some risk factors, these are not guarantees. These just are suggestive. If you have poor dietary habits, it potentially could lead to a chronic disease. There's no guarantee, of course. Just like there's no guarantee if you eat all the right fruits and vegetables, then you're never going to have any cardiovascular problems. That's not what we're saying. It's just a risk factor. Studies, and we're going to talk about studies eventually, nutritional studies, dietary studies generally suggest poor diet could potentially have long-term problems, could lead to long-term problems in some type of cardiovascular area or diabetes area, something like that. Lack of physical activity. We'll talk about physical activity a little bit later. But, think about now, are we getting the proper amount of exercise? Are we getting, they recommend about 150 minutes of moderate type of exercise each week, or vigorous exercise, about 75 minutes of vigorous exercise each week. Are we getting some of that physical activity? Right. What kind of, what are we doing as far as drug use? Studies have shown that tobacco use could lead to cancers, or could lead to cardiovascular disease, or could lead to problems with the brain, or strokes or something. Sometimes it's our genetics. Sometimes it's just in our genetics or family history. If you go to the doctor and you have a kind of a checkup, they probably were going to initially ask you, well, do you have a family history? Does anybody in your family have a history of certain types of cancer or certain types of chronic diseases? Because that plays a role in the risk factors. Could be environmental conditions. This could be some kind of psychological factor that may predispose us to a particular chronic illness. All right. Like I said, these are very short sections, and we'll look at section 3 also. Chapter 1 is just a conglomerate, I guess, of different topics that kind of put together, and a lot of these we're going to see over and over again. And so this is one of those. Here's a little chemistry there for you, though. A calorie, everybody's seen the word calorie before, but you may not have realized what it really means. And so here is kind of your book definition, or your chemical definition of what a calorie is. A calorie is basically how much energy in the form of heat that's required to take 1 gram of water, which is 1 milliliter of water. Think about how much that is. It's a very small amount. To increase that from where it's at temperature-wise up 1 degree Celsius. In other words, it's not very much. First of all, to know about a calorie, it's a measurement of heat energy, how much energy is required to change the temperature, in this case of water, by 1 degree. Because it's not much, what nutrition does is they really are talking about kilocalories. Anytime you put the kilo in front of the word, kilo means 1,000. And so 1 kilocalorie is equal to 1,000 calories. And so to kind of, I don't know, maybe kind of confuse us a little more, a kilocalorie is the same thing as a calorie with a capital C. That's the calorie we're used to seeing. So if you look on a nutrient level, we'll have some activities where you kind of find some nutrient levels maybe around the house, in your pantry, in your refrigerator. Look at that nutrient level, kind of see what it says on there. One of the things that's going to tell you is how many calories per serving that you have on that particular food. Well, it should have a capital C on there because it's talking about how many kilocalories. They could have just given us kilocalories, but instead they shorten it. They take the prefix off and they list how many calories. But again, that's a capital C. It's 1,000 of little calories. So hopefully that's not completely, hopefully that's a little clear. And you're not completely confused about that, but it's a measurement of how much energy is in food is a calorie. The more calories there are, the more energy is related to that, how much fuel source it'll provide for the body. Carbohydrates have have a lot of food calories associated with that, more so than a protein would per weight or per measurement. I mentioned this word already briefly, but here it is kind of in definition form. We know what a nutrient is now. Anytime you talk about a macronutrient, macro means large. And so this just means we need these in pretty large quantities compared to a micronutrient. So in other words, our nutrients that we need most of would fall into the categories of carbohydrate, a fat, a protein. That means micronutrients are things that we still need these. Micro means very small. They're not really energy related directly. They have impact on producing energy, but they don't supply energy directly from the source. And so these are just needed in very small amounts, usually microgram or even less type of concentrations or amounts there. Vitamins and minerals are our micronutrients. All right. The next section is 1.4 Key Nutrition Concepts. The book kind of goes through about 10 kind of big ideas, big themes, overall themes, and we'll see these kind of going through the course, but they introduce 10 main themes here. And we're going to start this in this video, and then I'll kind of pause it, and we'll have a second video kind of wraps up these themes and kind of finishes out for the chapter. But think about these themes or these concepts. Concept number one, most of these are pretty basic ideas. So for example, number one, most foods are really a mixture of nutrients, right? And so when you eat food, so think about, what did you have today, right? So if you're watching this at night, what did you have for breakfast? What did you have for lunch? What did you have for dinner this evening? Kind of think about the foods that you ate. It's really a mixture of all these different nutrients that we've talked about. It's a mixture of carbohydrates and fats and lipids, a mixture of vitamins, a mixture of minerals there. There's no real one food that just has, unless you're talking about just drinking pure water, most of our foods are just a conglomerate or a combination of many different combinations of these nutrients. So that's concept number one. Concept number two is that having a good variety in our diet, in our pattern of food choices, helps us to have, a good representation of all these different nutrients. So one of the main concepts here is that no food is really perfect. In this case, that word perfect means complete. No food is really complete, contains everything that you need. And so, if you're vegetarian and you're going to eat beans for every meal, you're going to be lacking some of the nutrients that you may need from other foods. And so you need to combine things like beans and rice go together, not because they're just available, but because they complement each other, because there's certain protein amino acids that are in beans, certain ones that are in rice, and you put those together, you kind of complete your overall requirements for amino acids. So no single food has everything that you need. So a variety. Make sure you have the proper, fruits and vegetables. Make sure you have the proper variety of protein source or carbohydrate source or fat source or vitamin source. We'll eventually talk about this, but you can go to myplate.gov and I'll show you some things about that. It's just a website, and they do a good job of kind of showing you recommendations on how much of each category, things like fruits, vegetables, grains, protein, and dairy, what type of recommendations to ensure that you are getting the proper nutrition and that you have the correct variety there. Concept number three. What do you think about this? There are no good or bad foods. Everybody's heard things like, that's good for you, or no, don't eat that, that's bad for you. But we have to almost step back and think of foods again as chemicals, as nutrients, because really all foods that we eat have some nutritional value. There are certain things that have perhaps better nutritional value or better types of nutrients. Maybe they're for you, and we can always have too many nutrients if we're not burning enough energy. It's almost like a kind of a scale. If you're not, if you are taking in more calories than you're expending, then yes, you're going to have some weight gain and perhaps lead to some of those chronic diseases that we kind of mentioned before. But everything has some kind of nutritional value. There are certain things that are called empty calories. Maybe you've heard that term before. It just means that certain foods have a higher amount of some unhealthy types of nutrients. The nutrients are still there. They're just not as healthy as other choices. Maybe they have a lot of solid fats. And so when we look at the chapter on lipids, we'll talk about saturated versus unsaturated or polyunsaturated fats. And so usually those solid fats are unhealthy for us. So we need to try to be careful about that. Maybe those empty calories come in the form of a lot of added sugar. And I'll show you on the nutrient labels how to look for some of these things. So when you're shopping for food, or when you get, you're looking at some nutrient labels, you can kind of pinpoint, well, how much saturated fat is there? How much unsaturated fat is there? What is all those little sugar lines mean itemized lines on that nutrient label because there's different ones that are there. And so we need to look, well, how much is naturally present in that food source? How many have been added to that food source? Alcohol, it has a lot of added either sugar or carbohydrate content. There's a lot of empty calories associated there. So there's kind of two categories to kind of think about. Rather than thinking about good and bad, the textbook kind of mentions, well, let's think about foods in terms of how are the nutrients? Is it nutrient dense? Is it energy dense? So if it's nutrient dense, it means it has a lot of beneficial nutrient, has a lot of good protein that's there, a lot of fiber. Fiber is a carbohydrate. It's not really necessarily an energy source, but it's a good carbohydrate to have in the diet. Does it have a lot of vitamins associated with it based on its kind of weight and overall grams there? Nutrient dense would have very little solid fats, so it may have some unsaturated fats, which is a good thing, especially those that are polyunsaturated. It would have little added sugar, little sodium. Sodium can lead to problems with fluid retention, perhaps even high blood pressure or hypertension. So nutrient dense. What about energy dense? Energy dense, based on the food's overall weight, means that it has more calories coming from things like fat, or more calories coming from a lot of added sugars. And so, so we had to kind of think about which foods, rather than good or bad, think about things that are how much is it more dense, dense with the nutrients, or is it more dense with calories, with energy? Let me give you some examples. Potatoes. Everybody likes potatoes. Maybe you like potato chips, but think about potato chips versus just a plain baked potato. They still have the carbohydrate content is there, but think about the other things that go into potato chips to make it more energy dense. Means, in other words, it depends on how it's prepared, but it could have a lot of sodium on the potato chips. It could have been fried in saturated fats, and so it may retain a lot of saturated fats instead of the healthier fats, versus a plain baked potato that would be more nutrient dense. And of course, it depends on how you're preparing that baked potato. Are you putting a lot of extra things on there, a lot of extra salt, sour cream, or cheese, or bake? Are you doing a loaded baked potato or just plain baked potato? But that's energy dense versus nutrient dense. What about yogurt? Maybe you like yogurt. I wish I liked yogurt, but I really don't. But it's very good for you, plain yogurt especially. But you have to kind of be careful. Look at those nutrient labels, because if you're getting yogurt that has a lot of added sugar to it, that's been sweetened somehow, maybe that's not as good for you. Maybe that's the energy, that would be energy dense, a lot of added sugar versus just plain yogurt that would have a lot of nutrients there. One more to kind of think about. Maybe you're a spinach person. I eat a little bit of spinach. But again, it kind of depends on how you're preparing that spinach. Are you making a cream sauce that has a lot of extra sugar or carbohydrates or fats part of it? Or is it steamed spinach that, that's a lot more healthy, that has more nutrients there? So sometimes it depends on how you prepare something. It's the same food item, but what are you adding to it? Are you adding something that makes it more energy dense versus nutrient dense? One of the things that one of the food sources a lot of folks eat are peanuts. Peanuts are very nutrient dense. They're very small, but they have a lot of good fats associated with nuts, and they're very nutrient dense type food source. Last one we'll look at in this video, and then we'll kind of pause, is concept number 4. And a lot of people realize this: enjoy eating all foods in moderation. Right? So moderation, trying to make sure you get the adequate amounts of nutrients that you need, but you've got to balance. It's always a scale. It's always balancing how many calories, how many energy calories are you taking in versus what you're expending out. So, if you have a pretty physically active lifestyle, if you're on the go a lot, you've got some time for exercise, and you're doing a lot of walking and exercising things, then it's okay to have, extra calories in your diet. And so it kind of depends on, how active you are. But moderation, does that mean, if your goal is to try to lose a little bit of weight, does that mean you can never have another brownie or another piece of cake or something? No, you just need to kind of moderate it, right? You need to, limit some things that are those energy dense foods, put some limitations there. Don't um, completely avoid them, but put some limitations there. Maybe some smaller portion sizes there for some of those energy dense foods. Try to select more nutrient dense foods, usually in the vegetable fruit category, and then reward yourself with a little of the energy dense foods kind of mixed in. And definitely incorporate these physical activities into your daily routine, moderate exercise, vigorous exercise, and that'll definitely help you there. All right, that's going to be the end for this particular video, and we'll pick up here with concept number 5 on the next video, and probably finish out the chapter. Thanks, guys.